hope this is going to work. Okay, good morning. We are live. American Literature 2130, Day 2, and we're introducing our first of several texts of the semester, Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. The theme of the entire semester is wildness in many different articulations of what that word might mean to you, but in particular, we're starting with two 1990s texts. Now, 1990s is in many of your cases, the decade right before you were born. It might have been the decade that your parents were in college, or that your parents met and fell in love and decided to start a family. And these are people of Generation X. They're a little bit, they're about my age, actually. The protagonists in both Into the Wild and Wild are Gen Xers born in the late 60s, early 70s, who did audacious, brave, crazy solo hiking adventures. One person passed away of possible poisoning or starvation, and he died. And so the first text is written in the genre of literary journalism, and it's called Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. And then the next text, the author is the main character. It's called a memoir, and it's about Cheryl Strayed. And so we're in two late 1990s, mid 1990s texts. Or stories. I think Cheryl's book comes out actually in this century. But anyway, we'll start with Into the Wild. Jon Krakauer is a nonfiction writer. He does not write pretend stories. All of his stories are true. His background is in journalism. That means his background is in magazines and in newspapers. He started out freelancing. He started out when he was, just barely able to make a living. He said when in his early days, he wasn't really, he wasn't really making a lot of money when he first started out, which is a kind of incredible when you think about it, that somebody who's as wildly successful today really just started out with not much. I think he was, working with his hands mostly. Some of you maybe as you're here in college are wondering, is a desk job or a research job or a teaching job or a nursing job or a high-tech job going to be my my final pursuit, or maybe I'm going to be working with my hands and working out there in the world. And freelancing also is a very kind of bold thing to do, because freelancing, you are your own boss, which is the cool part of freelancing. But the not so cool part of freelancing is that you don't know how much money you're going to make, right? So you don't know if what your income is going to be on a monthly basis. A freelancer might make really good money 1 week or 1 month, and then the next month it's going to be slim pickings. I worked freelance writing when I was young in college, and I got to write in a newspaper. Lots of people were reading my writing. I was writing movie reviews for a weekly paper in Detroit, Michigan. It was very cool. I got to see free movies every week. But here's the kicker, class. Here's the kicker. I was getting $50 for those reviews. I couldn't live on $50. So here's Krakauer. Literary journalism is the genre that he's going to get into. Literary journalism, or narrative journalism, tells true stories as stories in a more artistic way, using literary techniques to create a gripping and personal form of journalism. Literary journalism is called also creative nonfiction, usually involves research, similar to and sometimes overlapping with the personal essay, travel writing, other forays into long-form journalism. Literary journalism often inserts its writer. The main character is maybe the writer themselves into the story via first-person narration. That means they're using the I and the me. That places the author in the story as a character. Sometimes it's called immersion journalism, or my favorite, from the 1970s, author who basically kind of almost invented the style of immersion journalism, Hunter S. Thompson. Very crazy, bold guy. Don't want to try the crazy things he did leaving Las Vegas. No, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. They coined the term for him called gonzo journalism. So Into the Wild is a international bestseller that's been printed in 30 languages and 173 editions and formats. Krakauer himself today, his personal wealth is $35 million. He's pretty much retired. And he says he taught himself everything he knows. So I cannot have too much of a bold feeling about how important what we are doing in this class is, because Krakauer, in a very, very recent interview on a podcast, said, I have never taken a writing course. I have not taken very many English courses, and I was never a good student. So the guy we're studying said, I never took a writing course, and he's one of the greatest American nonfiction writers around. This book that we're reading this week is still on a best seller list. So Krakauer has many different ideas and many different theories that he sort of proposes, and one of the theories that he proposes is that this is of a type. I think I'm going to give you guys a link to that podcast in the chat there, the one that I'm referring to, because I think it is such a excellent podcast, and you could learn a lot more about Jon Krakauer if you are the podcast type of person. Maybe you're like me, you can listen to, they put you to sleep at night. Sometimes you can listen to them when you're doing your chores around the house. There's all kinds of interesting ways in which we want to tune into a podcast. And so I'm going to talk for just a moment this morning about the predecessors in history. So what Krakauer is doing here, and I'm going to be talking here about these guys generally because I want to talk about this idea of rewilding, of becoming immersed in wilderness, of connecting with wilderness, and also survival skills in wilderness. This is even adjacent to prepping. We today have been living with a lot of natural disasters. There was major flooding in Tennessee just this weekend. Last winter, we had a major winter storm, ice storm, snowstorm that put many of us without power. You know, Texas, where it's usually very warm, was sub-freezing, and people had no power, and there was flooding, and people could hardly even survive the storm down in Texas. And so this, you know, and then there's the wildfires in California, and there's earthquakes and hurricanes, a lot of weather events going on in our world. So people are starting to talk about, you know, do I have a kit? Do you all have a bag at the house with emergency supplies if you have to leave in a jiffy on foot or by car? This topic of survivalism will come up again at the end of the semester during the Parable of the Sower book. And so this whole theme of how you can survive in the world is a big part of this class of what kind of that independent American spirit is. Because, of course, our predecessors, our foreparents who came here as many of us of European descent, of course, there was people of indigenous who were already here, but if those of us who were our foreparents were the settlers, you know, they had this whole, you know, survivalism thing going on here as well. So we live in only very recent human history when we've had such a comfortable way of life. A modern industrial way of life, technologically sophisticated way of life is very, very recent. And so talking about this idea of the primitive and of the wild gets us in touch with the way not just our American foreparents, but generations of our grandmothers and grandfathers have lived on planet Earth for thousands of years. Even before Homo sapiens sapiens, there were, you know, humanoid ancestors that lived for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If the history of everything was a 24-hour period, we're all living it at 11:59 and 59 seconds at the tick of midnight. We are a brief spot in our timeline. And so one thing that Krakauer does with these antecedents, if you will, I'm calling them antecedents and accessories, is that he connects them with a masculine path. Now, we live in a world where we have feminism, where we have equality, where women can be leaders in sport, in politics, in the military. You have women serving in the military. You have so this idea of kind of a masculine kind of warrior aesthetic is kind of, in some circles, you might even say a little passé. But Krakauer, and when we read this in contrast with Cheryl next week, and she lives, the protagonist of next week's book, she doesn't die, right? So it'll challenge some of the theories and even maybe stereotypes that Krakauer proposes. But look, if you're a dude, and speaking as a dude, and if Krakauer's a dude, and he's studying this young man, there seems to be this kind of daredevil limit experience. You want to push yourself to the boundaries. You want to try extreme sports. You know, a 24-hour road race, going and doing backcountry camping. There is this kind of masculine ethos for these sort of extreme ideas, and so what this one author says the purpose of this, and this is a spiritual author or a religious author, and I will occasionally, I am a professionally trained theologian and a former, no longer currently serving as a pastor, but I did work for a short stint here a couple years ago as a minister. This religious writer talks about male evolution, male initiation. He says male initiation has to do with hardness, limit situations, difficulty, struggle, and usually a respectful confrontation with the non-rational, the unconscious, or if you will, the wild. It prepares the young man to deal with life in other ways than logic, managing, controlling, and problem solving. Frankly, it prepares them for the confrontation with the spirit. And so in ancient societies and primary societies, this ritual trial was part of growing up, a part of maybe reaching puberty or maturity. But today we have athletics, we have religious groups that do backcountry and camping and outdoor experiences. We have groups that work with people who are trying to get out of trouble, people who are in recovery from addiction or other mental health, or maybe they were in some kind of behavioral problems in high school. They might be, their high school might be out in the woods, and they might be required to learn to survive. We have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. We have athletics. We have definitely for people who are 18, and this was the path they chose. People who choose a warrior life. They join the United States military, perhaps. So Krakauer theorizes in those sections that I posted at the first slide about this idea of McCandless not having had a full initiation into manhood, and so this hobo kind of leather tramp lifestyle that he leads, hitchhiking around and so on, and then going to live in Alaska as being a part of his initiation into adulthood. And many critics, and Krakauer himself theorizes that by the end of the ritual passage, that McCandless was ready to come back, but he chose not to, or he was unable. He failed, and it was an accidental death. We don't know. Rohr continues that initiation always taught the young men to die before they died, and then he would begin to live. As my father, St. Francis, put it, if you have once faced the great death, the second death can do you no harm. So if you've ever had a traumatic experience, if you have any kind of PTSD, if you've had any kind of NDE, near-death experience, or if you just had something really, really scary happen, usually that makes you strong. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's a cliche, but often true. What doesn't make us, doesn't wound us too deeply, or once we have those wounds, we become wounded healers, we become wounded warriors, we become wounded friends of others. So there's something about going on a hitchhiking adventure, going on a solo camping or hiking adventure. There's something about this walk that Cheryl's going to take on the PCT that you could take on the AT, the Appalachian Trail, and something about what our main character in this book, who's a real person, Chris McCandless, is going through, is this idea of a rite of passage into manhood. And so some of the people that that Krakauer introduces us to include the mayor of Hippie Cove, Gene Rossolini, who was an A student, studied anthropology, history, philosophy, and linguistics. He communed with nature for much of the 70s and 80s and ended up killing himself. He went to be one with nature, kind of like Thoreau. Thoreau at Walden Pond was kind of a little bit more like a weekend warrior. Thoreau was very serious, and I don't think we should diminish the seriousness, but he was able to go back into town. He had some access to more, amenities. He never completely cut himself off. And so here we have, Rossolini doing all this, and he ends up not not living. He takes himself out. He was trying to face something extreme, and he gave up. There's this idea today of rewilding, and rewilding can mean a couple of different things. And there's been some really interesting reality television shows that address this kind of stuff on things, like National Geographic Channel, Discovery Channel. You'll find that there'll be shows about that. If you're a TV person, you may have come across even some of these shows. And so rewilding is adjacent to prepping, but it deals with two different aspects. One is the idea of rewilding the planet, and this has to do with global climate change and also extinction crises. So the first kind of rewilding on the first bullet point is the argument that we need to bring back more predators. We need to bring back more diversity of wildlife, that we need to re-inhabit the world with the variety of plants and critters that were here, a generation or so ago, and that we need to stave off the extinction, and we have to reintroduce these species and plants to their right areas. We know a lot of times when you bring species and plants where they don't belong, it can create other kinds of havoc that's not ecologically correct. And then there's this idea of people who are in training, and I say this is like prepping. A prepper is somebody who believes that there's going to be some kind of an apocalyptic event, some kind of end times event where they need to be ready to survive. This is very much the premise of the novel at the end of the semester, Parable of the Sower, which of course you're welcome to start reading these books at any time. But also these are people who want to learn how to hunt. They want to learn how to trap. They want to learn how to make their own clothing. They want to learn how to forage wild plants. They're basically seeing, is it possible to have kind of a hunter-gatherer kind of way of doing things in the present moment? And McCandless, he flirted with this idea, but he wasn't very good at it, or he wasn't very serious about it, or he didn't quite understand the magnitude of the skill level that was required for it. And so there's some, and Krakauer talks about this a ton in the book. Krakauer loves McCandless. He has empathy and sympathy for his situation, as empathy and sympathy for his family. McCandless ghosts his family and then dies. But as you see with some of the critics that come up, and every once in when I teach this text, every single time I teach the text, at least one or more of y'all, the student readers, will be more like the cynics. They won't be particularly impressed with Chris. They'll see him as a failure. And one way in which he's a little bit different than, I've met some of these rewilding types. I'm not speaking, completely out of turn here. An example would be this guy. This is years ago. I used to live out on some land in Liberty. I'm a townie now, and I'm a failed back to the lander. I don't have the skill set. I'm a better English teacher than I am a farmer. But I used to own a bunch of property. The property's still there. My ex-wife and my stepson, they take care of it. We're not together anymore, this person and me. But anyways, over in near Liberty, Tennessee. But I was out there on a bunch of land, and had some friends come to visit from North Carolina, and on the way home, they had encountered a roadkill on the side of the road, and this roadkill appeared to be fresh, and so they took the carcass. It was a deer. They took the whole deer, put the deer on top of their car, drove it to my house. Now, most of y'all would be like, when you have guests coming, for a visit, you were not going to be so cool. Hey, we just, got this dead deer on the car. You'd probably be pretty not okay with that. Well, the woman of this couple, she and I were working on a writing project, a publishing and editing project, which is more my jam. So we went into the cabin, and we were, at our computers and at our desks, like that. Well, he went out into the woods and skinned this animal, and then ended up preparing this animal for us, and that's just how they did it. So that's an example of people that, and he knew what he was doing, and he made a wood fire, and he cooked the venison, and we had fresh venison for supper. I'm a vegetarian. I wasn't a vegetarian at the time, but I couldn't really. Not really big on the heavy red meat, mammal meat thing. I'm more of a plant-based guy myself, but I did eat the venison that night. I mean, they went to all the trouble, to prepare it for me. So these are examples of, and those of you who are hunters and gardeners and farmers, you guys know what we're talking about. So rewilding in this sense is a physical component involving reclaiming skills and developing methods for sustainable coexistence, including how to feed, shelter, and heal ourselves with the plants, animals, and materials occurring in our natural bioregion. And I do really want to emphasize that, and it just happens to be because of circumstances of the world we're living in, that these people are connected to the prepping community. And you go online, you'll see. If you go online, you'll see that these communities exist. You can read books, about it. You can go into stores. As a matter of fact, during the pandemic, I was in a store and there was prepping stuff everywhere in the store. I'm not talking about the supplies, though. I'm sure there are stores you can go and get the supplies at. I'm talking about how I was in like a Walgreens, and over in the magazine section, you're going to see, these books with pictures and stuff you can order. And this seems to be very American. I mean, I think it's a global movement, but it seems really popular in America. And you're going to find it's on all sides of the political spectrum. And so between the climate change and the political unrest and the pandemic that we're living through, these ideas seem to have been gaining in popularity. And I thought they were popular when I started teaching this book in the early zeros, because we were coming away from Y2K, and then people were telling us that the world was going to end in 2012. And so I don't have anybody right now just telling me, in my ear, the world's going to end tomorrow, but we have all this evidence around us of global crisis, and you as young adults, at least through this unit of this class, you're going to become versant in this stuff. So you'll at least be aware this is going on, and you'll have the opportunity for your paper around the midterm, if you choose to write, about it. And so I watched for a while this National Geographic show, and there are these people doing this like full time, and then they let these, people come and make a movie about it, this TV show about it. This guy's living with bow and arrow, and they've got the clothing. They don't all look like this guy, but a lot of them look like white Jesus. They're like completely Bonnaroo ready looking dudes, hippie dudes with the hair and the beard and everything. And look at, he's pretty ripped, he's ready for it, and he's out there eating squirrels and stuff on this show. So it's a very cool thing. So this is a quote from our book on page 75 from one of the predecessors that Krakauer was looking at. He said, "I began my adult life with the hypothesis that it would be possible to become a Stone Age native. For 30 years, I programmed and conditioned myself to this end. In the last 10 of it, I would say I realistically experienced the physical, mental, and emotional reality of the Stone Age." So these rewilding types, some of them do go so deep into it that they're living as hunter-gatherers today, right? Like right now, as we're sitting here in our comfortable rooms with our internet that, sometimes works, but with all of our creature comforts. To borrow a Buddhist phrase, this person said, "I eventually came to a setting face-to-face with pure reality, and I learned it was not possible for human beings as we know it to live off the land." This person came to the understanding that society and community is more valuable. This is one of the basic themes of this textbook class, is the confrontation of society versus community. Are we primarily individualists, or are we primarily made for community? Do we want to be in these socially cohesive organizations, or are we better off, and should we be pursuing solitary type existence? So the other guy that he talks about disappeared, and we don't know what happened to him. And I find this to be in a way, more inspiring, I guess, because there's a mystery associated with this guy. But I actually, several years ago teaching this, I went out and got some of the books just about this guy, because there's kind of a whole cultural phenomenon around Chris McCandless. People used to go to the bus. There's the abandoned school bus that he lived in Alaska. Now they finally pulled that school bus away because and they're going to put it in a museum. Why, class? Because not only did Chris McCandless die in that school bus, other pilgrims were going to trace the steps and even to get an Instagram photo at the school bus. They also died, some of the pilgrims. But Everett Russ is a true nature mystic, and he really embodies the hunger and the passion that we see in McCandless. And for those of you who are not even remotely inclined to this, you're probably like doing the old scratching your head, SMH, shaking my head thing, and you have no appetite for this, no inclination, no understanding other than fascination maybe from a distance. But some of y'all might be like myself, and you might have a little bit of Chris McCandless and Everett Russ in you, and you might feel that desire to be in nature, to feel the power of nature. So he says, as to when I shall visit civilization, it will not be soon. I think I have not tired of the wilderness. Rather, I enjoyed its beauty and the vagrant life I lead more keenly all the time. I prefer the saddle to the streetcar and the star-sprinkled sky to a roof, the obscure and difficult trail leading into the unknown to any paved highway, and the deep peace of the wild to the discontent bred by cities. Do you blame me then for staying here where I feel that I belong and am one with the world around me? The beauty of this country is becoming part of me. I feel more detached from life and somehow gentler. I have always been unsatisfied with life as most people live it. Always I want to live more intensely and richly. So maybe you're a person who wants to live more vividly, that the mundanity, the routine, and the basicness of life has become to grind on you, and you're like, there's got to be something more. These are the spirit of Cheryl Strayed and the spirit of Chris McCandless, the spirit of Henry David Thoreau that we're talking about in the early days of this semester. As a child, I used to dream of such a life as this. Little did I imagine that all my dreams would be realized and all surpassed in every direction. Thinking of you, it seemed almost wrong that one person should have such utter fulfillment while another leads a life of poisonous denial. Poisonous denial. Much of the time, I feel so exuberant, I can hardly contain myself. The colors are so glorious, the forest so magnificent, the mountains so splendid, and the streams so utterly, wildly, tumultuously, effervescently joyful that to me, at least, the world is a riot of sensual delight. The world is a riot of delight. It's joy. It's a beautiful world. It's a gorgeous and amazing world that we want to walk into. We want to dance into this world. So we'll be comparing next week with Cheryl Strayed this this idea of finding connection. And she's coming at it from a place of great pain. And so did Chris. And so this is something for us to ponder. This Russ guy doesn't seem to be coming at it from a place of pain at all, but from a place of joy. Now I'm going to stop the recording right there. This is day 2, topics in American Lit. We're looking at wildness, and we were looking at the wildness and some of the streams and connections to Chris McCandless as documented by John Krakauer in Into the Wild. So we're going to keep